My very sort of loose observation of many fitness influencers, particularly women, is that they usually have some type of...
What do you recommend?
You don't have a damaged metabolism. If you've gained and lost, gained and lost, gained and lost, you haven't damaged anything.
Dr. Stephanie Estima, a leading authority in female health empowerment and founder of Hello Betty.
With a background in chiropractic medicine and a focus on metabolism, body composition, and female physiology,
Dr. Stephanie has revolutionized women's wellness through her innovative approaches.
She shares insights from top experts in health and wellness.
40 isn't old. You've just been brainwashed by society to think that you're rotting every single second the day you turn 40. Aging is such a privilege. It's such a privilege to become a grandmother.
It sounds really fancy, but what exactly does it even mean?
If your goal is body composition changes, it actually doesn't matter. People who are proponents of fasting often talk about...
Oh, wow.
That's the main message here. If you are someone who is concerned about performance in the gym, there's a very clear signal that...
Hi, my name is Aggie, and this is Biohacking Bestie. The one-stop shop for a modern queen, where you can find biohacking courses, self-growth courses, and where you can find the most incredible community of women so you can hit all of your biohacking goals and beyond.
Welcome guys to Biohacking Bestie, and today I am so excited because I'm hosting someone who I've been looking up to for such a long time, Dr. Stephanie Estima. She's a figure of empowerment in women's health, focusing on a holistic approach that blends modern science with actionable strategies. Sorry, I'll say it again. With actionable strategies, which I love so much. She has a very keen interest in metabolism, body composition, functional neurology, and female psychology. Dr. Estima is known for her female-centric approach to ketogenic diet, the Estima diet, and she has helped over 10,000 women in hormone regulation, fat reduction, and she's our guest today. So welcome. Hi, how are you?
I'm delighted to be here, Aggie. Thank you for having me.
I just want to say thank you for everything that you're doing for women in general, and everything that you do with your work. And kind of like we just dropped in earlier for your podcast, and I already expressed how much of a girl crush I have on you, just because you seem to be killing it. And it's just like reading the science and also understanding, hey, but what does it actually mean for me as a woman? So I guess my first question to you would be, in your journey, as you navigated the medical world and then started your own practice of working with women, what has been the hardest thing for you to unlearn?
That's a great opener. Wow. Okay. Well, I think that the one thing that jumps to mind immediately is that we are not small men with pesky hormones. I think that most of the medical community and the research literature that's available has often studied, university students who are trying to make an extra buck. It's usually like the 20, 25-year-old men that are where a lot of the research takes place. And for a really long time, women were actually excluded. Cycling women were excluded from randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses. These are sort of high quality, we'll say, studies, because our menstrual cycle was considered a confounding variable, because a woman is very different. If she's cycling and she's still getting her period every month and she's ovulating, she's very different over the course of that 29 and a half or however long the cycle is. She's very different over that course of time. And I think it was only in, I want to say 2017, where the NIH mandated that women are to be included as well, because there is such a lack of evidence-based practice or evidence-based literature for clinicians to be able to derive protocols and to serve our beautiful women. And, for people like me, it was like, well, we're just going to play with it. This is the data that I have available to me. This is I always think about evidence-based care for patients sort of as 3 overlapping circles, like a Venn diagram. It's like, what does the literature say? And sometimes that literature is very sparse. What does the patient want? And then the clinical experience, the clinician's experience, and in all transparency and honesty, when I was starting to tailor a lot of my protocols for women, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying to extrapolate what I knew from the literature, and keeping in alignment with and coherence with my patients' desires, and just kind of playing. And that's part of the reason why they call it a practice and not a perfect, because we are practicing with our patients. We are practicing how to best serve them. And that changes with time. So the biggest unlearning has been to just realize that there are different, especially for a woman in her fertile years, there's going to be times in her cycle where she wants to do things, not want to do things. She's going to be more resilient to stressors, eustressors and distressors, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. So good stressors and bad stressors, and more time, and other times in the cycle where she's not. And you were just on my podcast and you said something absolutely beautiful, and I'll reiterate it here because it was so on point. It's really reconnecting and having women understand the power of our cycles and understanding the power of the feminine, and being able to cultivate that into our everyday lives. There's times in the cycle where you shouldn't be podcasting, you shouldn't be doing a presentation, and as much as we sometimes just out of necessity have to sort of punch it out, just understanding that those different ebbs and flows in terms of how we function, our mood, our affect, our energy, our desire, our motivation, understanding that there'll be ebbs and flows. I think you're already winning, you're already in the top 1%, because there's so many women. Even now, I speak a lot to perimenopausal and menopausal women, and the number one thing I will still hear is, no one ever taught me that I should be tracking my cycle. Like, I've only started in my 40s looking at my cycle. And I think that as much as I'm happy that they've come to that in their 40s, it's also such a shame, because when we go to our primary care practitioners, it would be very useful as a patient to have the data to give to them and say, hey, listen, I have 5 years of data that tells me that my cycle is or was 29 days and now it's 26. And I can tell you that day 21 used to be like this for me and now it's like this for me. So I think that while we're getting better at communicating, and I will continue to beat this drum as long as people will listen. But as we can get better at data management and understanding how we're different. But that's the language, unfortunately or fortunately, that we need to be able to communicate with our PCPs, with our primary healthcare providers, so that they can best serve us. Because so many, and even my training, we had, here's the menstrual cycle. This is when estrogen's high. This is when progesterone. This is the luteal phase. But there was no. Even in practice, I started changing the way. So I'm a doctor of chiropractic by training. So my love has always been neuromusculoskeletal, right? It's always been like brain, bones, muscles. And I even started changing the way that I was adjusting my women depending on where they were in their cycle. Like, was it, was the type of adjustment a little gentler? Was it a little bit, could they handle a little bit of a bigger adjustment? Was it necessary? So I'm sure we'll talk about ligaments and estrogen and tendons and stuff, but I was starting to notice that even the mechanism of like the treatment needed to be judged, if that's a word, needed to be, changed a little bit based on how the woman was doing, what her stress levels were like, where she was in her cycle. So,
can you talk a little bit about your personal journey with your own cycle and how your relationship with your cycle evolved over time?
Oh, that's a good one. I talk about this in The Betty Body, my book, which is actually named after my podcast listeners. We call our podcast listeners our Bettys. So it speaks to my vintage heart. And also, they actually, my community started calling themselves Bettys, like, because they listen to Better, which is the name of the show. But I detail this in, I believe it's chapter 1 of the book, where I had such a tumultuous relationship with my cycle for years. I hated it. I felt like it was a curse. It was painful. Now, of course, retroactively, hindsight's always 2020, right? So I was running very estrogen dominant at the time. So very strong, very disruptive PMS symptoms. So my breasts were very tender and enlarged. I was holding a lot of water. I remember in the second half of my cycle, I wasn't necessarily tracking, but I knew that when my period was coming that I couldn't wear rings. So if I wanted to wear a ring, the I was just going to be ringless or like jewelryless that week, right? On my, if I wanted to wear anything. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's so interesting. And so what was that aha moment of like, maybe this isn't the worst thing on the planet, that I'm just not sure how can I support my cycle so that I can thrive?
It was a trip to Italy, which is funny because we were talking about Europe on when you were on my show. But I took my children to Italy for summer holiday, and we were there for about 3 weeks. And as you do when you're North American, when you travel to Europe, you want to make it worth it. So you stay there for a couple of weeks, and we were there for 3. And during that time, I got my period towards the end of the trip. So it was maybe the last week or so of the trip that we were there. And what was shocking to me was, despite having all the pasta and all the gelato and all the, the croissant, the cornettos there, and the cappuccinos and all the things, I had a wonderful period. There was no breast tenderness. There was no water retention. I normally would medicate. So I would normally take some type of painkiller. And the first usually day or 2 of getting my cycle was, just loaded up on medications and migraines, and I couldn't talk to anybody. And that was not the case at all. It was actually a very joyous experience. I felt like a goddess. In fact, I felt like, wow, this is so funny. And it was peculiar to me because it was the same body, obviously, the same body that I had that month than the previous. And the difference, certainly, I mean, you can make the argument that everything's better in Italy, right? But the difference, of course, was that I was getting a lot of sunshine. I was getting a lot of low-grade activity. My stress levels were much better. I was able to manage my stress through some of these, going out with my kids and sightseeing and spending quality time with them. And so when I came back to Toronto, which is where I'm based, knowing that environment plays a huge role in our health and well-being, I sort of set out on a bit of a journey of inquiry, self-inquiry, to see how I could replicate the conditions in Italy. So I can't get the Tyrrhenian Sea, and I can't get necessarily the food there because it's different, North American and European.
I feel like if you had that same diet in Toronto, you probably would put on a lot of weight.
Oh God. I mean, well, actually, I don't even have ice cream. I don't have those things here. And even because I know that I'm just going to have a terrible reaction to it. So, it's funny. Sometimes people will say, oh, the calories don't count in Italy. And it's like, well, they count, but they're better calories because they're being sourced from, like, the wheat sources are different. The cows are different. All the things are. In Europe.
You started on my favorite topic, which is like, is calorie or calorie? Are calories equal? And if there's such a thing as a good calorie and a bad calorie. And I love that you said that, because I feel quite passionate about it. So maybe we should expand, because I don't want people to think that you moving to Italy is the move, but it's just although if that's the one takeaway,
it might be, but yeah.
So just to reiterate, for those of us who are listening, okay, we have someone who has been trained professionally as a doctor, and yet still you haven't been educated for your practice of how to support women according to the cycle, right? Even as a chiropractor, that was just not part of your studies. And so you yourself weren't even aware how to properly support it, which is also very telling about where the medical system is right now. And hopefully it's changing, but that was just treated as humans. You're treating humans, right? Or women, at least similar to men. Then the whole idea of quality of foods, and depending on where that... In a way, if you live in North America, I personally don't feel like we have a choice not to biohack or improve ourselves. I think Europeans can get away with their pizza and pasta and still be fine. But for us, it's almost feels like it's a choiceless choice, because the food that we have served on regular basis isn't exactly something that would make us feel good. So if you can expand all of these 3 massive points, I would be very curious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. One of the things I'll say is, in my training, we did have a lot of nutrition. So that's one of the things where I do think that there's a distinction in terms of the educational, maybe some of the differences between the traditional sort of medical schooling and at least most chiropractic schools, as far as I'm aware. I'm very proud. I'm, class of 2003 from Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College. We do get quite a bit of nutrition training, but there isn't the distinction And I don't even think that it was ever, I think that this is more of a nuanced conversation that has sort of come up in the last 10 or so years, where we're thinking about how women are actually different. And that's part of the reason for that is some of the reasons I was outlining before. Like, women were traditionally excluded from research, and we just sort of extrapolated and said, well, they're shorter, smaller, little men, so we'll just sort of titrate down, and whatever we find in our male, the studies that are done with these university men, we'll just sort of apply to women, and hope that it sticks. So I will say that my nutrition training was quite robust, but to your point, there wasn't any distinction between male and female, and some of the differences that can occur even metabolically for a woman over the course of her cycle. And I know that we'll talk about this, but one of the sort of key hallmarks in terms of differences of our sort of metabolic capacity is we're actually quite metabolically active in the second half of the cycle. So in the luteal phase, as you very well know, since you wrote a book on this as well, is that we are literally creating an organ. We are, I mean, it's such a funny thing to say it that way, but we are literally creating an organ every single month. So of course your caloric demands, of course you're going to be hungrier. Of course, we're going to be diverting nutrients to the womb space, to the endometrial lining, in order to, whether or not you want to have a baby, your biology is going to operate independent of that, and it's going to build up essentially a 5-star hotel for a impending, fertilized egg, right? So you're going to be diverting amino acids and free fatty acids and glucose, and then all the minerals like selenium and zinc and, magnesium and all the things to that womb space, so that we can, treat the fertilized egg like the 5-star guest that it is. And so we are much more metabolically active, let's say in the second half of the cycle. We are, and this is part of the reason why many women will report that they are hungrier in the second half of the cycle. So I know we'll get to this, but I'll just sort of put it, I'll sort of drop the pin now, and we can come back to it should you want to. But this is part of the, if you're trying to white knuckle, if you've said to yourself, okay, I'm going to have X amount of calories. Let's say it's, 1,800 calories a day. And I'm just going to do that all month long. Well, you are going to probably find that in the second half of your cycle, if you are trying to white knuckle your way through that, you are going to be miserable. You're probably going to fall off, as I did. So I had also done the setting the target calories, setting the macros, and I'm going to do that all month long. And then of course I would be white knuckling it. And then the fourth week, I would just completely fall off. All the cookies, the chips, the crackers, all the things would be consumed. And then I would blame myself, because I would say to myself, why are you such a loser that you can't, that you can't keep to this diet, you can't stick to it all month long. And it was only really when I understood that it was actually my cycle driving some of these hunger, like driving up that hunger, because I am creating, as I mentioned, like creating a new organ every month, that I was able to find peace with the idea of eating more in the second half of the cycle and being okay with it.
Oh, you touched on again. So let's talk calories, because I love that you brought that up, and this whole idea of just feeling like we're broken where we can't follow a men-centric diet. And so are there good calories and bad calories? And how come we can allow ourselves to have more calories, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we're gonna get, necessarily throw away our fitness goals, right? Because that's the idea. If you're not sticking to 1800s calories and you're not doing the same workout, well, you're gonna get bigger, and that's not exactly the case.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Good calories versus bad calories. I would say that, when we look at what a calorie is, it's basically your body's ability, like the energy that's expended in order to extrapolate the substrate or the nutrients from the food that you're eating. So very technically, if you have 300 calories of Skittles versus 300 calories of, chicken breast or something, technically it is the same, but of course the signaling and the hormonal cascade and the satiety in the body is quite different from those two food groups. So I think that there's a bit of nuance to this question. So yes, technically it's going to take 300 calories, 300 sort of kilojoules for you to be able to break down the Skittles or the chicken breast or whatever. But are you going to be satisfied from that 300 calories of Skittles versus like, what's your satiety going to be like between the two? Is there a tendency to overeat, right? Are you going to be just able to have the 300 calories of Skittles, or are you going to want more because you're not going to feel like you are satiated? You had mentioned when you were on my show that you would have, I think it was an oat milk latte or something, or maybe a yogurt, something like that. And then you were in the fridge, 45 minutes later, or even just at the end of your meal because you didn't feel like you were like, I just still need something. And there's mechanisms in the body, certainly in the gut, where your gut is constantly monitoring for protein and fat. So you will continue to eat. And this is part of the reason why a lot of people have trouble with the vegan diet long term, is because it tends to be, it's not always, but it can be a very poor source of protein. It tends to be very carbohydrate heavy. And when you're having a lot of carbohydrates, again, when you equate for calories, like if you're having the same amount of calories as someone who's having a higher protein diet, let's say, if you stick to those calories, depending on what your goals are, you can still achieve the same thing. You can still lose the weight. You can still, whatever, but it's going to be orders of magnitude more difficult for you because your hunger levels are going to be much higher. Your CCK and some of these proteins that we see, and neuropeptide, some of these elements that we see in the gut that are constantly scanning for protein and fat, and which is what causes a lot of people to graze, right? It's what causes, I'll just have a little bit of nuts, I'll just have a little bit of cookies, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So are calories equal? In the technical sense they are, but in terms of the signal that they have in the body, it's going to be quite different. And for most cases, when you're having sort of, I would say, nutrient devoid foods like Skittles or something like that, it's going to be very hard for you to manage your total caloric intake over the day because you are going to be hungrier. You are going to feel hungrier. So,
yes. And I also want to just say that like when we think of calories, we think that there is this idea that I need to eat 1,200 or 1,800 calories.
Well, I said 1,800. What I really wanted to say is most women are trying to do 1,100 or 1,200. Right. But I was trying to give a healthy example. Yeah.
I mean, been there, done that. But I also, I couldn't wrap my head around it when I got into first doing keto, is that I had twice as many calories. And I was the fittest, with the least amount of body fat. I'm like, wait, so I guess when I say calories are not equal, yes, from the energetical standpoint, yes, but like, how come I can quote unquote get away with 2,500 calories and be skinnier? And as a vegan, I was doing 1,000 calories and I was putting on weight. And so there's this. There are macros. There's also like the whole conversation of the quality of the food, right? So you mentioned that about Italy, that it's just less processed. There's no glyphosate that disrupts our gut, and all of these issues that all of a sudden the inflammation goes down and our leptin, ghrelin get regulated when we eat healthy and we have enough fat, and all of a sudden we don't even crave that much food. But I genuinely probably have twice as many calories, even though people say like, oh, fat is like so heavy in calories. I'm like, I have so much fat and I look great. Like I almost have to like look at myself sometimes and I'm like, more protein Aggie or like more fat, because I'm getting almost too skinny with if I don't pay attention to I try to eat more, not less, which is a lot of women have a hard time believing that there's a chance.
Yeah, this is an unraveling. This is an unraveling that has to happen. And it's like, you cannot have 1,100 or 1,200 calories indefinitely, and particularly as you age. So, I don't know if you speak about perimenopause or menopause at all, but you
not yet,
need...
But I would love to ask you more questions, actually.
Sure. Yeah. I think that the 1,200 calorie thing, for most women, you are going to be in a low energy availability environment, and you're going to have, what's called metabolic adaptation. So when we think about the calories in, calories out, it can be a bit oversimplistic to think about how to manage our calories is like, well, we have 1,200 calories, but we burn, 1,700 calories in a day, then that's a 500 calorie deficit. You can do that temporarily, but over the long term, your body is infinitely more wise than you could ever, you cannot out-trick your body. And so what ends up happening is this concept of metabolic adaptation. So you might be, at the gym, whether you're weight training or you are, doing excessive amounts of cardio. And I'll also just say that it's my clinical experience that I often see the women who are doing the 1,200 calories are also running and doing hours and hours and hours of cardio and not necessarily prioritizing lifting weights because they know that, the cardio session is going to burn 400 calories or 500 calories, and my weight training session only burns 80 in the short term. But of course, we know the long-term adaptation to putting on muscle actually revs up your capacity to burn calories anyway. But I digress.
To that point, actually, that whenever I was under eating, I wasn't able to lift weights. I was able to do cardio, but I wasn't able. That's where I know where I'm under eating.
Yeah.
On those weeks when I was super stressed with the book launch, so I was under eating, like, oh no, I can't lift my regular weights. It's like, oh, interesting. Because I didn't have, and even and the difference could be within 5 to 6 days,
and your muscle's metabolically active tissue. It's functionally active tissue. It requires food. You need to feed. If you want your muscles to grow, which should be a goal of every single woman on the planet, irrespective of your age, you want to be putting on muscle for metabolic freedom, for your ability to have the bowl of Skittles should the feeling arise. Your muscles are going to be, they are not only a glucose sink, meaning that they are going to help dispose of excess blood glucose that's in the system, maybe from the bowl of Skittles or whatever you've just had. But they're also, there's so many good things with I don't know where you want to go with this. I find myself, I'm starting to get really excited. Yeah.
What does your intuition tell you that you think my audience would benefit from the most?
I think where I was going, and I'll tie this in with muscle in a moment, is the 1,200 calories is not going to serve you because that metabolic adaptation. So let me talk about the metabolic adaptation, then I'll jump onto muscle. Your total energy, like your total daily energetic expenditure, so your what's called TDEE, total daily energetic expenditure, will start to come down. Even when you are at the gym and you are doing you think you're doing the right thing, you're lifting the weights, you're doing the cardio, the energy out, so the calories and the energy expenditure in the gym is going to go down, which I think is very cruel, right? If you're not eating enough, your body will understand that and say, all right, we're going to just dial down the calories that we can burn here. And everything slows down. Your digestive system slows down, right? Because your digestive system is trying to sort of extract every last inch of food that does come through there, which is, we were talking a little bit about this on my show, which is like the gut issues, the constipation issues, the bloating, all of that stuff starts to come when you are chronically calorically restricting.
That is so powerful. Sorry, I just want to repeat that too, because this is so powerful. So when I came on your show, we discussed that we know almost every woman in our life that has some sort of bloating, motility, digestive issues. But what you're actually making the connection of right now is that often under eating, so being in constant calorie restriction, which is basically what mainstream fitness advice tells you to shred and look good, leads to you having all of the digestive issues. Maybe, if you don't have the right motility, it can lead to SIBO, which means that basically you would bloat after almost every vegetable and fruit on the planet, which is brutal. Been there, done that. And it's the connection is fascinating.
Yeah, and if you pay attention to some of the fitness influencers who are shredded, they often will complain about gut issues as well. So they will, if you have individuals that you like and admire, and I'm not saying not to try to aspire to be the best version of yourself, but at least my very sort of loose observation of many fitness influencers, particularly women, is that they usually have some type of gut issue, and
period issue.
And yes, and they usually they're usually not cycling regularly as well. So those are things that we want to be thinking about when we are in a caloric deficit. And then the other thing I'll also say is you don't actually have anywhere else to go should you want to lose more weight. Do you know what I'm saying? So once you sort of reach this plateau and you're trying to lose more weight, you don't have where are you going to go from 1,200 calories? You're going to go to 800. And then where are you going to go from there? 400. And, you have to really think about and this comes back to this metabolic flexibility and a safety signal. The more food that you are giving your body, you are sending a safety signal. So you are going to menstruate, which is what every woman should be aiming to do, menstruating like a goddess.
I love that. That sounds like the name of your next book.
Menstruating like it needs to be a t-shirt.
Right.
Currently menstruating like a goddess. Yeah.
So good. Yeah. We're going to start a merch company together with just this is so good.
I love it. And then when you're thinking, so I'll tie this in with training, your muscles need substrate. When you are lifting, when you're contracting those sarcomeres, those the individual the individual muscle cells or muscle units, I'll say, those need food. You need to give your muscles food so they can grow. In the same way that if you were growing a plant and you didn't put it in any water, or you didn't put any water in it, or you didn't put it in soil, and you were thinking, well, why isn't it growing? It's because you haven't put it in the environment that allows for the conditions for it to flourish. And the same is true for your musculoskeletal system. So muscle is, as I was mentioning before, a glucose sink. So it actually allows you to have more food. It burns, when you have more lean muscle tissue, it allows you to have more food with a little bit more freedom without some of the consequences that many women are concerned with, which is excess, putting on excess adiposity or putting on excess fat. It helps to regulate your blood glucose, which does change as we age, right? So as we get older, a natural consequence of aging is that we become more insulin insensitive. So when there is blood glucose sort of circulating, your pancreas initially will have to work harder to get the blood glucose into the cells. But when you constantly have a high insulin signal, your cells will downregulate their sensitivity to it. So over time, the net is that your muscles are going to stop, or all cells in your body, but insulin insensitivity usually starts in the muscles, will stop listening to the insulin signal, which will give us higher blood sugar. And then, of course, the net effect of that is that your liver is going to start producing more fat. So we have a spillage now of triglycerides and low density lipoproteins into the blood. And all of a sudden, your 40-year-olds who might be listening are saying, I don't understand. I'm eating the same way. I'm training the same way. And all of a sudden, my cholesterol levels are through the roof. So this is also why it's really important to be at least preserving muscle tissue, but ideally adding to it over the years and decades that we are around, because it helps to regulate our metabolism primarily through glucose disposal, as I mentioned. It helps to regulate insulin sensitivity, or to promote insulin sensitivity. And then there's other areas that we can kind of geek out on if you'd like, but it's also a very powerful immune modulator. It helps with driving up something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, lots of letters there. It just basically is like miracle grow for the brain. It helps your brain preserve your brain tissue. And I said this in my book, and I'll say it to you now. It's sort of like tongue in cheek. This is like my humor, which I think I'm hilarious. It's like, it's open mic night in my head. But it's like, if there's an organ that you want really big and thick and juicy, right? It's your brain, right? We always want. And so I thought that was hilarious when I first thought of it. I put in the book. So if you get my humor, if you don't, please excuse it. It's just,
if you thought about anything else than brain, you have a very dirty mind. I don't know.
Right. Exactly. I don't know what you were thinking about. I was thinking about your brain, your cortex.
Yeah, always brain. Yeah, 100%. Oh, I have so many questions, because I love that. So if you're listening to this, you don't need to wait till 40 and 50. Just imagine that every year of your life, why don't you just try to add just a little bit more protein? Just understanding that, okay, I need to slowly, just because I had 2 eggs for breakfast for the last 15 years of my life, maybe I can just add some piece of salmon or whatever it is as we get older. I don't like the word age. It makes me feel like it's getting worse, but it's not if you're doing it the right way.
Well, I think that's society. I posted something to my Instagram the other day. It just really spoke to me. I saw someone say something. It was like a little meme, and it said something like, she's over 40. Oh my God, she looks amazing. What's her secret? And then, underneath it was like, her secret is 40 isn't old. You've just been brainwashed by society to think that you're rotting every single second the day you turn 40.
Yeah, that's so true.
And I think that aging, I'm 46. So I am definitely square in the middle of perimenopause, moving towards menopause, as 100% of women will eventually go through. And, sometimes you look at, world events, and certainly I'm not a political commenter, and I try to stay away from that as much as I can, but we're so lucky to be alive. It's like aging is such a privilege. It's such a privilege to become a grandmother, or, a mother, and then a grandmother. And then maybe like I lived with I knew my great grandmother. So and she was 90s, I think she was 96 when she eventually passed away. But I think that that's such a beautiful thing. And you think about some of the wars, and where, we have wars on women and children, and men are, dying. And it's, maybe we'll have an offline conversation about this, but I'll just say that I feel like aging is a privilege. And I think that maybe we need to, in society, move away from anti-aging and moving more towards aging well. What does a well-lived life look like? What is the wisdom that you've accrued? How can you, help the women who are, behind you, who are on the same path as you? How can you elevate them? And how can you learn from your elders? And how can we start reclaiming the wisdom and the power of the matriarch, of the grandmother, of the great grandmother, and the wisdom that they've accrued over the course of their life?
Yeah, and it does feel like we're using the word aging interchangeably with the word rotting or deteriorating, instead of just like growing old, right? Which is beautiful, like a tree. I love that. So let's talk about the diet. So how did you, what was the driving force behind creating your own diet, and kind of just realizing like, this is all really good, but I need to create the Estima diet and just help women navigate this crazy landscape of diet advice that isn't serving them?
Well, it originally didn't start as a female-focused program, I'll say that. So when I was still in private practice, practicing in Toronto, we would run nutrition programs, because it goes, the back of the envelope 30-second chiropractic philosophy is we want to be managing our physical inputs, right? So we want to be lifting weights, we want to be getting rehab, we want to be working on flexibility and mobility, we want to be managing our chemical inputs, so that's the medications we take or don't take, preferably don't take, and then also your diet, which is chemical signaling, and then of course our emotional health, right? So what is should we be fasting from social media? Should we be, having people around us who charge our batteries or drain our batteries? So it's sort of like chemical, physical, emotional. So I would often run nutrition programs and I would run fitness we'd do squat challenges and all these different fun things in the clinic. And so I started a ketogenic diet program originally in the clinic for, any patient who wanted to sort of participate in it. And very quick, it was a ketogenic style diet. And it was like, I believe it was 70% fat, 20% protein, and then the fill. So it was like 10% carbohydrate. And very quickly noticing that it was very apparent with the husband and wife couples. So we would have the husband and wife sign up for the program, and then the guy would come in like 2 weeks later, and he was like, "Doc, this is just the best. Like I've lost 20 pounds, and my energy is through the roof." And we would do labs with them and things, and like their testosterone was like everything was great. And then the woman would be like, "I don't get it. We are eating the same foods. We are doing the same thing. We're in the same environment." And he's lost, let's say 10 or 20 pounds or whatever it was. It was always an extreme amount. Like men very easily would drop the weight. And then she would say, "I've lost 2 pounds and I've been stuck at the 2 pounds now for a month and I don't understand why." And so that sort of clued me into, okay, so something a little different here. And so I started playing a little bit with having them track their menstrual cycle and how their mood, their energy, their affect changed over the cycle. And I just have to say, like, God bless these women who allowed me to, like, practice on them. They were essentially my guinea pigs. And then we started, and sort of the methodology sort of was born from that. So I would notice that
you probably were at the forefront. Sorry to interrupt, but you were at the forefront of adjusting diet to the cycle. Because, even when I got into living according to the cycle 3 or 4 years ago, that was so low key. So I could only imagine what it was like, when you were doing it in the practice for the first time to like be, oh, dang, like there was no one to like refer to almost, right?
Yeah, it was just completely, honestly, at some points it just felt like a shot in the dark. Like some things worked, some things didn't. So then I started sort of playing around with it, revisiting, notes and reading PubMed and like, how does estrogen affect, what's our tendency for resilience in the first half of the cycle versus the second half. So we were playing a lot with that. And it took me, gosh, I can't say exactly now, maybe a year to come up with something that I felt like was reproducible, like I could reproduce something pretty consistently for women. And so what we ended up doing was there would be a therapeutic intervention of the ketogenic diet initially. So to get that little weight loss, to get that little, shedding of water, reducing the bloat, which, also can sort of ramp up your dopamine, which also keeps your motivation high to continue with the diet, which is important. And then from that therapeutic intervention, maybe it was a month. It depended on the woman. So sometimes I had women who were dealing with endometriosis or PCOS. I needed them to do that a little longer. I needed to clamp down on their carbohydrates a little longer. But if you weren't dealing with some type of hormonal issue like Hashimoto's or PCOS or something like that, then what I started to do was cycle it. So it was first half of the cycle, we could do more aggressive fasting. We could clamp down on carbohydrates a little bit more. And then the second half of the cycle was ramping up the protein, I wouldn't say ramping up the carbs, but we would say, so moving from, let's say 70, I think we were 70, 20, 10, and then we would move to 40, 40, 20. So it was 40% fat, 40% protein, and then 20% carbohydrate. And that seemed to be like just the sort of, magic sauce for women. They needed more protein in the second half of the cycle, much more satiating for them because they're hungrier, more carbohydrates. So it's almost like a doubling of the carbs in the second half of the cycle. The other week I would do that actually was week 2. So I would do 70, 20, 10 in week 1 and 3, and then I would do 40, 40, 20 in week 2 and 4. So week 2, I wanted more protein because I was also counseling my patients on training and proper technique with squatting and pull-ups and all the things. So I wanted them to have more protein to drive, something called muscle protein synthesis, which is just... Yes,
I'm so glad you brought it up because it was my next question to you. So let's explain that because it sounds really fancy, but what exactly does it even mean?
Yeah, this is one of the few examples in science where the name actually indicates the process. Sometimes you have like, Bohr's law, or, you have something named after someone and you have to just, the Warburg effect. So it's, you have to really understand, who the person was and what their contribution was. Here, with muscle protein synthesis, you're synthesizing muscle proteins. So it's very clear. And so there's a couple of ways that you can drive MPS or muscle protein synthesis. One is obviously lifting weights. So there's a mechanical stimulus. So when you are breaking down muscle fibers in the gym, which should be a goal of yours, you are going to stimulate MPS, muscle protein synthesis, to repair the fibers that have been damaged and to grow better ones. So there's like usually a turnover, and your efficiency, like the muscle efficiency, becomes better. That's how you actually get stronger over time. So that's a mechanical stimulus. You can also do that with the diet, right? So you can also stimulate muscle protein synthesis with protein. So increasing your protein in the diet. Now, not all protein is created equal, which we'll get to in a moment. But when we are having sufficient amounts of, in particular, an amino acid called leucine, there are others, isoleucine, and there are other amino acids, but this one in particular seems to be the forewoman. She seems to be the gatekeeper. And once we sort of reach critical mass, critical minimum effective dose, let's say with leucine, then we can start this process of MPS or muscle protein synthesis. So I'll state my bias insofar as I like animal proteins more than I like vegetarian or vegan proteins. And I'll say that it's not that you can't do it with so I often am asked, like, what about pea protein, or what about rice protein, or what about soy protein? So it's not that you can't do it with those types of, like if you're having like a vegan protein powder or something, or even like a tofu or a tempeh or something like that. You can still get there. You just often, what needs to happen is you need to ingest more of it in order for you to reach sort of the level that you might by consuming a whey protein powder or like an animal protein like beef or chicken or liver or goat, that kind of thing. Or I shouldn't say liver. Liver's not, liver doesn't have it. So that, if you are someone who's concerned with calories, you have to think about, if you're a vegetarian, are you going to need to, by necessity, overconsume your calories in your protein sources in order to get the results? And most of the time, the answer is yes. So for those of you that are not willing to consume animal proteins for whatever reason, it's totally fine. You can do it. You can still get there. You have to do your jurisprudence, and you have to be someone who knows how to combine all of her amino acids and all that, and that's fine. But just know that you're probably going to need to consume more calories in order to get there.
What do you think about the connection of being able to absorb? Because I think that's what very interesting point with, like, as we age, we produce less digestive enzymes, and so from my experience, I always try to have digestive enzymes almost at every meal, but especially when I'm having protein powders, just to make sure that I don't have any undigested protein in my gut. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's different bioavailability of different proteins as well, right? So when we think about animal proteins, and actually I'll include soy in this as well. So for those of you that love soy protein, the bioavailability of those proteins are very high. It's high 90s. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. It might be 96 or 97% bioavailability, which is great, which means that the protein that you're putting into your meal, let's say you're having a whey protein powder or soy protein powder or an animal, grass-fed beef or something like that, most of that is getting absorbed and utilized. When we look at pea proteins, rice proteins, the bioavailability markedly drops off. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it's going to be something like, instead of 96% availability, we're looking at something like 60 to 70, maybe 75% bioavailability. So again, there's sort of a two-pronged issue here. One is that you don't have, like, protein powders that are vegan or vegetarian don't have a lot of leucine to begin with, and the bioavailability of the protein is also very poor. So again, if you're someone who's concerned with calories, then consuming this again, you're going to have to, by necessity, have to consume more of it.
So that's super interesting. What would you say is the connection? I love that I guess I should retract that back. I love that we're both kind of understanding how different it is for us women to work out, eat and fast according to our cycle. So if you can touch upon fasting and working out, and because we mentioned a lot about muscle, but how would that influence us, and what happens when we're working out when we're fasted, or what do you recommend?
I am so happy you asked this question. I put something up on my Instagram a couple weeks ago, and I was not expecting people to be so maybe activated by it. Yeah, we'll say passionate. That's a great word, passionate. So inspired to comment. And it was basically like a silly little meme. It was like a picture of Kylo Ren, if anyone is a Star Wars fan. And I said, when you know that you should eat before you train. And then, like, the little line underneath it was his part in the movie where he said, I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to do it. So fasting is something where I, probably like you, have changed my mind on it over time. So I used to try to push my fasting window far back into the day. So I would try to fast until noon or fast until 1 o'clock, let's say in the afternoon. And then my fasting window would last for 7 or 8 hours after that. So I would be eating at, until maybe 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. What I found when I paired, and this is just so I'll just speak about this from an N of 1, from my own experience. This is not to,
you didn't run clinical studies on this.
Yeah, there's no, but I will say that there are. Okay, so I want to get to fasted working out with fed working out. I'll just tell you my experience, and I'll talk about fasted versus fed cardio, fasted versus fed working out. I found it I tend to work out in the morning, so I like to wake up. I like to have my coffee, and I like to listen to the birds. I like to be outside, and then I like to be in the gym. And I did that fasted for years, and then I would still push my window afterwards. And I found that I could do it, but it was very difficult on my system. Even though I was having enough calories, I just didn't enjoy it. So I started to sort of almost phasically shift the fasting window to earlier in the day. So I started eating right after I worked out. And then most recently, I eat before I work out.
Yep.
And
then you have early dinner?
Yeah, I like the seniors, I like to be finished eating around 4:00. So that's my
we would
ideal.
Be besties. We would 100% be besties, because it's so hard to find people to have dinner at 4. So today we're going out for dinner with my fiance, and the booking is at 4:30. And it's so easy to get a table.
It's the best. And you have the whole restaurant to yourself. The service is great. Yeah, I love that. Now, I will say that there does continue to be, especially people who are proponents of fasting, will often talk about fasted cardio or fasted working out versus fed. And the literature that has been done on this, there's quite a robust amount of evidence to suggest that if your goal is body composition changes, it actually doesn't matter. So you can work out fasted, you can do fasted cardio, you can do fed cardio. When you are working out fasted, you will burn more calories during the activity. But of course, your body, being infinitely more wise than we ever could hope for, will down-regulate your caloric output as soon as the exercise is finished, and it'll also upregulate your hunger hormones. So the net effect over the day is the same. So if you eat before you train, or you eat before you do cardio, or you fast doing your cardio or you're working out, it is, for body composition, there's no difference. So just pick what you like. However, if you are someone who is concerned about performance in the gym, if you're someone who's concerned about muscle glycogen recovery and the long and short term adaptations to training, so that's putting on more tissue, and then also your recovery from your exercise workouts, there's a very clear signal that eating prior to your training sessions is far more superior in terms of performance in the gym. And that's just kind of common sense, right? If your body has food, it has something that it can use. It doesn't have to draw on the stores that it already has. And then that's going to also help with muscle tissue remodeling. It's going to help with, like I said, short and long-term adaptations to training. So I am someone who has now switched to making sure I eat prior to my training sessions, because performance is a big part. Like, that's a big goal for me. I want to be able to feel strong. I don't want to feel like I've bonked. Like, I don't want to feel like I've fallen off of a wall during my sessions.
We're exactly the same. I went through the exact same journey. So doing fasted workouts, even lifting weights during my workouts, and then realizing that, like, well, I can't lift as heavy, but if I lift heavier, then I build more muscle, and the more muscle I have, the more naughty, quote unquote, food I can get away with. So I started with something like, oh wow, like maybe I don't have to push myself and be hungry in the morning. And that was, I guess, what I really love what you bring to the table. It's just that, like, looking instead of things out of a context of 2 hours and looking at them from a context of a year, for example. Like, what does it mean for me in a year? Same with calorie restriction, right? Like, it's sure there is this advice, and how does it apply in a context of your life and all the other variables?
Like, who cares if you can get in shape for 6 weeks out of the 80 years that you're here? You know, like, who cares that you got into the bikini or you lost 10 pounds or 20 pounds for 6 weeks? Out of the 80, 90, whatever, how many years you're here. What matters is what happens over the course of your entire life, right? So,
and you can't do 1,200. Yeah, sorry.
No, please.
I was just going to say, you're setting yourself up for failure. So I would love for you, before we even, I have so many questions, but I want to kind of explain what happens in their body when we yo-yo dieting, right? So it's very common for women to have this idea, shred for the wed, or I don't know what
for the wed. I haven't heard that. That's funny.
But so it's like lose, like, we have this event, all of a sudden we feel like, wow, I got myself to a point where I'm really not happy. I'm going to calorie restrict and do these fasted workouts. And then we bounce back. So what happens if we do it 3, 4, 5 times in our life, that we will shred and then bounce back to our previous weight?
Well, I think that the overall thing is that it's incredibly frustrating and it's incredibly demotivating, right? To be losing the same 10 or 15 pounds over and over again. I would say psychologically, it probably puts you at a greater risk for failure to start anything new, because you're going to say, well, I did it for the high school reunion, or I shred for the wed or whatever. And I did this one thing, two things, these one-offs, and then it always comes back. So I think psychologically and this is, I'm starting here because I think that people underestimate how our psychology influences our behavior. It's like your state, the story that you're telling yourself is going to dictate your state, right?
But also in all areas of life. Like, what if you're not starting a new business because you feel like, well, I never succeed.
I never follow through. I always fall off the thing. I start something, but I can never finish it. And I hear this from women all the time when they start diets, where they might start the diet and maybe they had some success with it, but then it doesn't translate into a long-term change for them. And then what do? They say, what's wrong with me? Why couldn't I stick to it? Rather than maybe looking at the diet or the protocol and saying, this is probably not sustainable over the long, like anybody can fast aggressively for 6 months. Anybody can, or a couple weeks or whatever it is. Like humans don't like to be uncomfortable, right? So the likelihood of you sticking to that over the long term is very poor. So the gaining and losing over the course of your life, I think, is very demotivating. What we know about metabolism, interestingly, is that even it tends to remain relatively constant. So this is actually a newer finding. We were always taught, well, as you age and over the age of 25, we start to see the steady, slow decline. But for women, and I'll send you the study if you'd like to link to it. It's very interesting. They had a really nice N, like the N was like 6,000, maybe 7,000 people that they followed over time. 64% of the cohort was women. So you're also getting like a female signal in there as well. And what they noted was from age 20 to 60, the metabolism is relatively constant. So
that basically means that whole myth of like, I'm slowing down metabolism is not true.
That's right. They do start to see a decline at about 63. Right. So at 63, we do start to see a decline. And I think they looked at
63 years old.
63 years of age. Yeah. Okay, so they looked at women and men up until, I want to say it was like 95 or 96 years of age. And they noted that the cohort in their 90s, I think that their metabolism was like 20% lower than the cohort in their 20s to 60s. So the net effect, so you don't have a damaged metabolism. So that's the main message here. So if you've gained and lost, you haven't damaged anything. You're not broken. Your body is just adapting to the signals and the environment that you're giving it. It's just a matter of finding the right thing that you can adhere to over the course of time. Like I said, who cares if you lose weight for 6 weeks for the high school reunion or whatever, when you're going to live to 90 anyway? What is the thing that's going to work for you over the course of your life? So the metabolism piece is really important, because I think that a lot of women come into, dieting or wanting to look better, thinking that their metabolism is broken, or that their metabolism is slow. And it's like, well, it might be slower because you are losing muscle tissue, but you can certainly correct for that at any point in your life. So and this is another thing that we used to think you can only really put on a significant amount of muscle prior to menopause, because we have all these anabolic hormones. We have the testosterone and the estrogen in abundance in women. But we know now, of course, in menopause, and I'm sure you've seen people online, there's like 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds that have a significant amount of muscle tissue. So whether you are 65, 45, 25, the best time to have started muscle training, I will say, is like 10 years ago. The second best time is today. So if you didn't start it 10 years ago, no problem. You can start today.
Well, I have so many questions. I haven't even gotten to the questions I've been meaning to ask you, but just the final one, I want to ask you about the connection between our posture and the cranial adjustments and release and our well-being, our health, and why is it so important?
Oh, this is a good one. This is a very chiropractic question. Thank you for asking it.
Because I only recently discovered that it's probably chiropractor is my favorite person on the planet. And I was just like, I really so much, I want to cry. Like, why is this connected? I don't understand.
Oh, it's so funny. Every time I have a neck adjustment, so shout out to my chiropractor, Christina, every time she adjusts me, I cry. And it's usually like it's the occiput. So it's like the right at the top of the neck. We call it C0, right? So it's
I can even feel it that it needs to be adjusted because my chiropractor taught me like what to look out for in my neck.
Yeah, there's just, I think that women typically where we tend to hold tension is axially. So it tends to be in the neck, even in the shoulder area, right? So that's a little bit more appendicular, but we tend to hold a lot of tension sort of in the neck and shoulder area. And I often joke and say like women carry the world on their, on their shoulders. It's no surprise that that's where a lot of our attention is. The other thing with women, I will say as well, and this is a little technical, but I think your audience can handle it. But the necks, female necks, and this is like from 16 years in private practice and like X-raying, I don't know how many hundred, like lots, thousands of women, they're longer. So women have more elongated necks. We're more like giraffes, right? We have that sort of long, beautiful neck. And normally a curve in the neck, we want to see, it's like a banana shape. We call it lordosis. It's like a backward C. But when you have a longer neck, you are much more predisposed to distortions in that neck. So what I would often see with women is that not only would that curve flatten, but in many cases it would reverse. So we would see like, we would call it like an S shape. It's just like a serpentine shape, where we would have parts of the neck that were actually kyphotic or like there's a backwards facing curve rather than a forwards facing curve. And so this is going to put an inordinate amount of tension on the supporting postural muscles in the neck. So in and around, like, so the occiput, as you were mentioning, that is a major attachment point for the trapezius, the splenius, there's all the muscles in the neck and a lot of the muscles in the back. Actually, like the trapezius comes up there. We have a lot of attachment in the neck. And so when you have distortion at the osseous, when you have bone distortion, so if you have the curve of the neck is off, you have the muscles, which are, I would always say in practice when I was explaining to patients, they're almost like sponges, right? So they will sop up the glucose, literally, like we were talking about. They also sop up emotion, right? So again, when we are thinking about being emotionally and spiritually healthy, your muscles are also going to hold on to a lot of that residue. So if you're a woman who is constantly burning the candle at both ends, you're driving your kids around to soccer and you're trying to make the marriage work and you're trying to make the career work and you're, doing the laundry and all the things, and maybe you don't have a really good support network, your muscles are going to be sort of holding, and this is a bit more, this is more, maybe a bit more woo, but your muscles are going to, your muscles are going to hold on to that, right? This is why, we always see people like they brace, right? It's like that sympathetic dominance, right? It's that fight or flight. So when you release that through a chiropractic adjustment, I don't know how technical you want to get. I can super nerd out here, but like when you adjust someone, you're resetting something called the muscle spindle, which is basically the muscle spindle is involved in how long the muscles are going to be. Like what's the resting tension? The Golgi tendon organ is another, the GTO is another area in the neck, or whenever you're adjusted, that's going to be reset as well. So the reason why we want to cry, or the reason why we might get emotional after a neck adjustment, especially higher up in the neck, I often find that I always cry with like C0, 1, and 2, is because you're resetting the length. You're allowing for that like tension to sort of drop out of the shoulders. And you're like, actually, this is what normal feels like. Like I have been holding myself so tight and tense. So that's sort of the best I can sort of do on the spot in terms of explaining why that is. But almost every woman, and I would also say this as well, in the luteal phase, if you get cervical adjustments, you will also release more. So you are just you're a bit more sensitive in the luteal phase as well. So cervical adjustments in the luteal phase, really, really good therapy, like generally good therapy for like mechanics, but also for emotional release as well. Yeah.
I love that. Stephanie, where can my viewers find you and my listeners? Because this is super fascinating. And so I imagine that your podcast dives in into a lot what we just talked about.
Oh, thank you. That's so gracious of you. So, my podcast, I'm a podcast host as you are. So my podcast is called Better with Dr. Stephanie. And like I mentioned, if you are interested in joining the Bettyverse, we would love to have you. So we talk to thought leaders such as yourself, and other scientists and researchers and, anyone who can speak to what it means to live a well-lived life. So we talk about metabolism and fitness and hormones and stress management and pleasure and joy and all the things. So you can find me wherever you're listening to Aggie. You can find me if you just search Better with Dr. Stephanie. That's where I am. We are gearing up to release the Estima diet, as you mentioned. I am actually updating it and expanding it to include perimenopausal and menopausal women. When I first wrote the diet, it was for women who were cycling, and now I want to also include my beautiful Betties who are in their perimenopausal and menopausal years for that, sort of the second and third steps. So it's not available yet, but if you go to our website or my website, drstephanieestima.com, you can sign up for my newsletter, and we give our community. I send a newsletter out every week. It's called the Mini Pause, and we explore conversations around hormone. Like we give action items and all of that, and announcements are always in there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for being so graciously share everything that you know with my audience. I love you so much. And thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm just going to stop recording. This was